In the dusty heart of the summer of 1887, when justice seemed like a counterfeit coin in the palm of those in power, a young woman was about to discover that truth can be sharper than any blade. The bells of the Whisper Creek courthouse tolled like death knells as the hot desert wind carried with it the metallic taste of fear and injustice. The sun beat mercilessly on the red dust of Whisper Creek, and Eliza Hayes felt every grain of sand insinuate itself into the folds of her worn cotton dress. Her hands, calloused from years of farm work, trembled as she clutched the white handkerchief her adoptive mother had sewn for her so many years ago. That small square of cloth was all that remained of a life that was about to be swept away like dead leaves in the wind. The courthouse stood before her like an insurmountable mountain, its white columns looking like teeth ready to devour her. The crowd had gathered in the square, curious and judging faces watching her as if she were already condemned. Some whispered, others stared in silence, but all seemed to have already decided her fate. "Eliza Hayes," the judge's voice boomed in the stifling courtroom, "you are accused of fraud, manipulation, and embezzlement against the deceased Henry Beaumont." The words struck her like stones hurled against glass. Henry. His name evoked memories of gentle hands that had taught her to read, of evenings spent on the porch watching the stars, of a paternal love that had filled the void left by the tragedy of her childhood. Now that same name was being used as a weapon against her. Eliza looked up at the judge, a gray-bearded man who had once dined at their table, who had laughed at Henry's jokes and called her "little one." Now his eyes were as cold as steel, avoiding her gaze with the determination of one who has already made a decision. The wind blew in through the open window, stirring papers and dust, bringing with it the scent of sage and dry earth. Eliza closed her eyes for an instant, trying to recall Henry's voice telling her, "Truth, my child, is like water. It can be diverted, it can be muddied, but in the end, it always finds its way to the sea." When she reopened them, she saw Wesley Beaumont sitting in the front row, dressed in black like a raven, with a thin smile that didn't reach his blue eyes. Henry's biological son looked at her with the satisfaction of one about to get what he wanted. His hands, soft and well-kept, so different from his father's, drummed nervously on his hat. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. The silence grew denser than the summer air. Eliza felt the weight of every gaze, every held breath. The handkerchief between her fingers seemed the only real thing in that theater of lies. "Not guilty," she said in a clear voice, and her words echoed in the courtroom like a death knell. But even as she spoke those words, she knew her innocence held no weight on that rigged scale. The die was cast, and she was alone against a system that had already decided to crush her. The wind continued to blow through the windows, bringing with it the scent of a storm on the horizon. Eliza's memory slipped back in time like a river returning to its source. She was 9 years old when her world collapsed. Bandits had arrived at dawn when the fog enveloped the small frontier farm. Her mother had pushed her under the wagon, whispering, "Don't make a sound, my little one." For 2 days she remained hidden in that smelly darkness, feeding on the apples her mother had slipped into her pockets. Silence was her companion, broken only by the wind between the wooden boards. It was Henry Beaumont who found her, with his kind eyes and calloused hands. "What's your name, little one?" When she whispered her name, he smiled. "Eliza." A beautiful name for a brave girl. Henry had no children of his own after a fever had taken his wife and son. Eliza became the lost light. He taught her to read, to care for animals, to distinguish the stars. But above all, he taught her that honesty was the only wealth no one could steal from her. "See that star?" he would say to her on summer evenings. "It's the North Star. Truth is like that star, child. Even when everything is dark, it continues to shine." Eliza absorbed every word like dry earth absorbs rain. She learned to ride a horse, to read the signs of the weather, but above all, to love that kind man who had saved her. When Wesley returned after years of absence, Eliza was 18. Henry's biological son was elegant, with a trimmed beard and city clothes. He spoke of politics and commerce using words she didn't know. Henry listened with pride, but Eliza saw something cold in his blue eyes. "Father," Wesley said on the porch, "you should think about the future of these lands. Progress doesn't wait." Henry nodded slowly, the wind ruffling his white hair. "The future belongs to those who guard the past." Wesley smiled without warmth. "Stories don't pay taxes." Eliza clutched the handkerchief between her fingers, uneasy. There was something about Wesley that disturbed her, like a horse sensing danger. Then Henry fell ill. Wesley arrived with expensive doctors, but the old man refused everything. "I want to die as I lived, simple and honest." In his last days, Henry called the notary. Eliza heard him speak in a low voice, firm and determined. "Eliza," he called that evening when the sun painted the sky red. She sat beside the bed and he took her hands, now cold as dry leaves. "I've left you half of everything. Not because Wesley isn't my son, but because you are the daughter of my heart. Promise me you'll use this inheritance to do good." Eliza nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Papa." That was the last word Henry heard. Papa. And for him, it was enough. Henry's death arrived like a cold wind. Eliza watched over him for 3 nights, holding his hand as his breath grew faint. Wesley left immediately after the funeral, but his cold eyes lingered too long on the notary's documents. Left alone, Eliza found herself surrounded by memories. Henry's armchair, the pipe on the table, the books marked by his fingers. The night wind made the beams creak, as if the house were weeping. During a sleepless night, she heard noises, furtive footsteps, whispers in the dark. She got up, clutching the white handkerchief, and approached the window. 3 men were rummaging in the shed, their lanterns dancing like malicious fireflies. She recognized Jedediah Croft, the judge's assistant. What were they looking for at night? Like thieves. The next morning she found the shed turned upside down. Documents were scattered, some torn, others missing. But they hadn't found what they were looking for. Henry had hidden the important documents in the old family Bible. Flipping through the yellowed pages, Eliza found the original will and a letter. "My dear Eliza, if you read this, someone is trying to harm you. Wesley is my blood son, but you are the daughter of my heart. I have seen the greed in his eyes. The lands I leave you are a responsibility. Use them to protect those who have no voice." Her hands trembled as she read. Henry had foreseen everything. 2 weeks later, the summons arrived. Eliza was accused of fraud and manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. False witnesses, suspicious bank accounts, a presumed written confession. But they were all lies. She recognized Wesley's hand behind every lie, every forged document. The night before the trial, she sat on the porch. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth. She looked at the stars, searching for the North Star. "Help me, Papa," she whispered. The wind picked up strongly, rustling the leaves of the oak tree. Eliza understood. She couldn't fight Wesley with lies, but with the truth. She hid the documents in a box and buried it under the oak tree. She folded the white handkerchief into her pocket, close to her heart. Tomorrow she would discover if justice still existed. The second day of the trial opened with a suffocating heat that made the courtroom air heavy as molten lead. Eliza sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped in her lap, the white handkerchief hidden in her palm. Her eyes searched for a friendly face in the crowd, but found only morbid curiosity and already formed judgments. Wesley rose for his testimony with the grace of a seasoned actor. He wore a perfectly pressed black suit, his hair carefully pomaded. When he spoke, his voice filled the room with measured, convincing tones. "My father was a generous man, too generous," he said, feigning a pain he didn't feel. "In the last years of his life, that girl took advantage of his old age and loneliness." Eliza felt the words like slaps. Every sentence was expertly crafted to paint her as an unscrupulous manipulator. Wesley spoke of missing money, altered documents, psychological pressure on a sick old man. "I have proof," he continued, pulling out a folder. "Letters that show how Eliza Hayes blackmailed my father, threatening to abandon him if he didn't change the will in her favor." The judge examined the documents with a grave expression. Eliza recognized them. They were letters she had indeed written, but their content had been altered. Where she had written words of affection, now there were threats. Where she had expressed gratitude, now there were demands for money. "This is false," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. The wind blew in through the open windows, stirring papers and dust, bringing the bitter scent of an impending storm. Eliza closed her eyes, trying to feel Henry's presence, his voice telling her never to surrender to lies. It was then that Jedediah Croft, The judge's assistant she had seen rummaging in the shed that night, rose. His testimony was devastating. He swore he had seen Eliza burn documents behind the house, that he had heard her confess her misdeeds to an imaginary friend. She was completely out of her mind, Croft said, feigning reluctance. She talked to herself, laughed for no reason. I understood that guilt was consuming her. Eliza felt her world collapsing. Every word was a lie, but said with such conviction that even she began to doubt her own sanity. The jury's faces hardened more and more. Their gazes grew cold as winter. During the break, Eliza found herself alone in the courthouse hallway. The guards had gone out for air, and for a precious moment she was free to think. The white handkerchief was damp with sweat in her fingers, but she continued to clutch it like a lifeline. It was then that she saw a shadow approach, a tall, gray-haired man with worn boots and eyes sharp as a blade. She recognized him immediately, though she hadn't seen him in years. Silas Blackwood, the former sheriff of Whisper Creek. "Miss Hayes," he said in a hoarse voice. "May I speak with you?" Eliza nodded, unable to find words. Silas was a legend, a man who had cleaned up the town of bandits when she was still a child. What did he want from her? "I knew Henry Beaumont for 30 years, Silas said. "He was the most honest man I ever met. And you are his daughter, in the way that truly matters." "Then why does no one believe me?" Eliza whispered. Silas looked her in the eyes, and she saw something she hadn't seen in days. Genuine compassion, not condescending pity. "Because truth, miss, needs courageous allies, and I am here to offer you my help." The wind grew stronger, making the courthouse doors slam like war drums. Silas Blackwood entered the courtroom like a storm sweeping away the clouds. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and silence became absolute as everyone turned to look at him. Even the judge stopped speaking, his eyes wide with surprise. "Your Honor," Silas said in a firm voice, "I ask permission to present new evidence in this case." The judge hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he leafed through the papers. "Silas, you are no longer in service. You have no authority in this court." "No," the former sheriff replied, "but I have eyes to see and a conscience to speak, and what I have to say will change everything." Wesley shot to his feet, his face pale. "This is irregular. This man has no right to interrupt the trial." But Silas ignored the protests and approached the judge's bench. From his coat, he pulled out a worn leather folder full of yellowed documents. "Henry Beaumont gave me these documents 3 years ago," he said, his voice filling every corner of the room. "He asked me to keep them as insurance in case something happened to him." Eliza felt her heart stop. The white handkerchief in her fingers grew damp with tears of relief. Henry had thought of everything, even this. "This is the original will," Silas continued, holding up a sealed document. "Signed by Henry Beaumont in the presence of 3 witnesses, including Dr. Morrison, who can confirm the testator's perfect mental clarity until the last day of his life." The wind entered through the windows with greater intensity, making the papers on the lawyers' tables flutter. Wesley looked around nervously like a trapped animal. "But there's more," Silas said, pulling out other sheets. "This is a letter written by Henry Beaumont shortly before his death, in which he explains his intentions and warns against possible attempts to contest the will." The judge took the letter with trembling hands and began to read. As his eyes scanned the lines, his face grew increasingly serious. "I know my son Wesley's greed," he read aloud. "I fear that after my death he will try to deprive Eliza of her rightful inheritance. She has been more than a daughter to me and deserves all the love and protection I can give her even from the grave." A murmur rose from the crowd. Eliza saw Wesley clench his fists, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool breeze. "There's one more thing," Silas said, and his voice hardened. "Jedediah Croft, stand up." The judge's assistant slowly rose, his face ashen. 3 nights ago I saw you rummaging in the Beaumont property shed with 2 accomplices. You were looking for these documents, weren't you? Documents that Wesley sent you to steal." Croft began to stammer, denying everything, but Silas continued relentlessly. "I have the names of your accomplices. One of them is already ready to testify in exchange for immunity. Do you want to confess now, or wait to be arrested for theft and false testimony?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the windows. Eliza looked at Wesley, and for an instant their eyes met, In his, she saw pure fear, the realization that his castle of lies was crumbling. "This is a conspiracy," Wesley cried, standing up. "This man is making everything up to protect that... Mind your words," Silas interrupted him, his hand instinctively resting on his hip where he once wore his pistol. "You're speaking of Henry Beaumont's daughter." The judge banged his gavel, but the sound was lost in the increasingly strong wind that now filled the courtroom. Night fell over Whisper Creek like a black cloak. Eliza walked home, her legs trembling after the suspended trial. The judge had declared a recess to examine the evidence, but everyone knew the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Wesley had fled the courthouse, disappearing into the crowd. Jedediah Croft had been arrested, his confessions confirming everything: conspiracy, falsified documents, corrupted witnesses. The wind carried the scent of rain. Eliza stopped at the gate, her home. Finally, those words had meaning again. "Miss Hayes." Silas Blackwood emerged from the shadow of the oak tree. In the moonlight, his gray hair looked like silver. "How can I thank you?" Eliza asked, clutching the white handkerchief. "Don't thank me. Henry asked me to watch over you. It was his last promise." They walked together towards the house. "Why didn't you intervene sooner? You had to learn to fight on your own. Henry wanted you to become strong, not just protected." They entered. Eliza lit the lamp. The light illuminated Henry's armchair as if he were still there. "Wesley won't stop," Silas said. "He has too much to lose." The sound of horses came from the road. 3 riders approached, dark silhouettes against the sky. "Bounty hunters," Silas whispered. "Wesley must have put a bounty on you." "What do we do?" "You do nothing. I still have bullets for justice." The door exploded. A burly man with a black beard entered, followed by 2 others. Silas drew his weapon, but a hunter was faster. The shot echoed like thunder. Silas staggered, blood on his white shirt. "No!" Eliza cried. "The bounty's just honor, old man," Blackbeard said. Silas smiled despite the pain. "Remember what Henry taught you. Truth always finds its way." Eliza helped him sit down, dabbing the wound with the white handkerchief. "Let's go, miss," the leader said. "Wesley Beaumont pays well." The wind came in, bringing the first drops of rain. Eliza slowly raised her hands, the white handkerchief still clutched in her palm. "I'm not coming with you." Blackbeard laughed, a hoarse sound like gravel. "You have no choice, miss. We are 3. You are alone." "She's not alone." The voice came from the back window. Eliza turned and saw a slender figure slide into the house. A young woman with long black hair, dressed like a man and with a pistol in her hand. "Who the hell are you?" one of the hunters yelled. "Elena Ramirez," the girl said, her smile not reaching her cold eyes. "And you are trespassing on my friend's property." The tension in the air became electric. Silas, despite his wound, smiled. "Good girl. How did you find me?" Eliza asked. "Silas sent me a message," Elena replied without lowering her weapon from the hunters. "He said you would need help." The wind intensified, slamming the shutters. The rain began to fall harder, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. 3 against 3, Blackbeard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. 2.5, Silas corrected, pressing the handkerchief to his wound. "But Elena is worth 3 men. Elena chuckled. "Compliments, Sheriff. But now these gentlemen must leave. Wesley's money is stained with blood," Eliza said, finding courage she didn't know she had. "Like yours. If this story is capturing your attention, and you want to discover how Eliza will face this new challenge, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this compelling Old West saga." The rain now beat violently against the windows. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a thunderclap that shook the walls. "Last chance," Elena said, slightly raising her pistol. Blackbeard looked at his companions, then at the wounded Silas, then at the 2 determined women. He calculated the odds and didn't like them. "It's not worth it," he muttered. "Let's go, boys." "Wise decision," Elena said, following them to the door. The 3 hunters mounted their horses in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night, swallowed by the darkness like ghosts. Eliza sank into a chair, her legs no longer supporting her. "Who is Elena Ramirez?" Silas smiled, his face pale but his eyes bright. the best shot south of the Rio Grande, and the daughter of a man Henry helped years ago. Elena approached, putting away her weapon. My father always spoke of Henry Beaumont. He said he was the only gringo with a clean heart he had ever known. But why help me? Because you are his daughter, Elena said simply, and because women must help each other in this world of foolish men. Outside the storm raged, but inside the house there was a new warmth. Eliza looked at Silas and Elena, and for the first time in weeks she felt truly safe. The white handkerchief, now stained with blood, lay on the table as a silent witness to a battle won. Dawn arrived timidly after the storm, painting the sky pink and gold. Eliza woke up in Henry's armchair, the white handkerchief still clutched in her hand. Elena slept on the sofa, her pistol within reach even in sleep. Silas was gone. Where did he go? Eliza asked, gently shaking her friend. Elena opened her eyes, immediately awake. He left at dawn, said he had a promise to keep. From the yard came the sound of carriages. Eliza looked out and saw a crowd gathered at the gate, citizens of Whisper Creek, journalists from the capital, even some neighboring ranchers. They want to see the heroine, Elena said with an ironic smile. I'm not a heroine. I'm just a girl who told the truth. In these times, that's the same thing. Eliza dressed carefully, combed her hair, and put the handkerchief in her pocket. When she opened the door, spontaneous applause rose from the crowd. Miss Hayes, a journalist shouted. Is it true that Wesley Beaumont has fled to Mexico? What do you plan to do now? Will you marry Silas Blackwood? The questions overlapped like waves against rocks. Eliza raised a hand and silence fell suddenly. Henry Beaumont taught me that the earth has memory, she said, her voice carrying clearly. It remembers who loves it and who exploits it. I will use my inheritance to honor that memory. An old cowboy took off his hat. What does that mean, miss? Eliza looked at the crowd, then at the house where she had grown up, then at the horizon where the rising sun promised a new day. It means I will open a school for orphaned children, here, in this house. I will teach them to read, to write, to distinguish right from wrong. And the women? A female voice asked from the crowd. For women too, Eliza replied. For those who need to learn to defend themselves, to assert their rights. Elena approached her, whispering, You'll need help. I know the law, and I know how to shoot. Are you sure? It won't be easy. Things worth doing are never easy. From the group of journalists emerged an elegant man with a notepad. Miss Hayes, some say this affair will change the territory's laws regarding women's rights. Eliza smiled, thinking of Henry and his words about truth always finding its way. It's not up to me to change the laws. But if my story can help even one woman not to be afraid to tell the truth, then everything I've been through will have made sense. The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of sage and damp earth. It was no longer the wind of despair, but of hope. One more question, a journalist shouted. Do you forgive Wesley for what he did to you? Eliza touched the handkerchief in her pocket, feeling Henry's invisible presence beside her. Forgiveness is a personal choice, but justice belongs to everyone. The crowd began to disperse, many stopping to shake her hand or promise support. Elena remained by her side, looking towards the horizon. 3 weeks later, Eliza was arranging desks in the old dining room when she heard a frantic gallop approaching. She looked out the window and saw Silas dismount, his face marked by fatigue, but his eyes bright with satisfaction. Eliza, he shouted, entering without knocking. We got him. Wesley? Him specifically. He was trying to board a ship for Europe in New Orleans. He had false documents and a suitcase full of stolen money. Elena emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. What happens now? Silas sat down heavily, the wound on his side still visible under his shirt. Federal trial. The evidence we've gathered will nail him for fraud, corruption, and attempted murder. Attempted murder? Eliza asked. For the bounty hunters. One of them spoke in exchange for immunity. Wesley had given him specific orders. If they couldn't take you, they were to make it look like an accident. Eliza felt a cold shiver, despite the afternoon heat. She instinctively touched the handkerchief in her pocket. There's more, Silas continued. The investigation revealed that Wesley had been robbing the territory for years. Inflated contracts, bribes, embezzlement. His political alliances are crumbling one after another. Justice. Elena said with satisfaction. But Eliza felt hollow. She had hoped that Wesley's capture would bring her peace, but instead she only felt tired. "Aren't you happy?" Silas asked, noticing her expression. "I don't know. I thought seeing Wesley in chains would make me feel better. Instead, you feel like it's all pointless," Elena completed. "I've seen it before. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it only covers them." Eliza nodded. Henry wouldn't have wanted this. He believed in justice, not revenge. "Then honor his memory," Silas said softly. "Do what you would have done anyway." That evening, the first students arrived at the house. 3 orphaned children from the nearby village brought by a widow who had heard about Eliza's school. They were dirty, hungry, with eyes full of fear and hope mixed together. "What are your names?" Eliza asked, kneeling to their level. "Johnny," whispered the eldest, no more than 8 years old. "This is Mary, and he's Pete." "Welcome home," Eliza said. And as she spoke those words, she felt something heal inside her. Elena brought warm milk and cookies. The children ate in silence, their eyes never leaving Eliza, as if they feared she might disappear. "Tomorrow we start with letters," Eliza said. "Who among you already knows how to write their name?" No one raised a hand. "Perfect. Then we'll start from the beginning." That night, while the children slept in the rooms that had once been hers and Henry's, Eliza sat on the porch. The wind was gentle, full of promises of spring. She pulled out the white handkerchief and looked at it in the moonlight. It was stained, torn in one corner, but it had survived everything. Like her. Silas approached silently. "Do you think Henry would be proud?" Eliza smiled, the first time in weeks that the smile came from her heart. "I think he's here with us." A month later, Henry's house echoed with children's voices and laughter. The old dining room had become a classroom, with wooden desks built by the town carpenter and a blackboard Elena had brought from the capital. On the walls, colorful drawings by the children showed houses, horses, and endless skies. Eliza was teaching writing when she heard a carriage stop at the gate. From the window, she saw an elegant woman alight, accompanied by 2 young girls. "Continue copying the letters," she told her students. "Elena, can you supervise?" The woman on the doorstep had gray hair pulled back in a perfect bun and a blue silk dress. Her gloved hands nervously clutched a purse. "I'm Eleanor Sterling," she said uncertainly. "I've come from Austin. I heard about your school. Welcome, Mrs. Sterling. What can I do for you?" The woman looked towards the carriage where the 2 girls waited. "My husband died 6 months ago. Debts took everything. I can't read. I can't keep accounts. I don't know how to support my daughters." Eliza saw the tears the woman was barely holding back. "Come in. Elena, bring some tea." "I don't have money to pay," Margaret whispered. "Who spoke of money?" Eliza said softly. "Henry taught me that education is like water. It must be free to flow where there is thirst." The 2 girls were named Sarah and Emma, 6 and 8 years old. While their mother spoke with Eliza, they played shyly with Mary and Pete, sharing improvised toys. "You can stay here," Eliza said. "There's room for everyone." Eleanor burst into tears. "How can you be so generous to a stranger?" Eliza touched the handkerchief in her pocket. "Because I too was a stranger whom someone helped." That evening, while preparing beds for the newcomers, Elena asked, "What will we do about money? Henry's savings won't last forever." "I have an idea," Eliza said. "Tomorrow we go to town." The next day, Eliza and Elena presented themselves at the Whisper Creek Bank. The manager, the same one who had testified against her during the trial, now looked at her with respect mixed with embarrassment. "Miss Hayes, what can I do for you?" "I want to sell half of the lands I inherited, the ones furthest from the house. But they are the best lands for pasture. They are worth a fortune." "Precisely. I will use the money for the school." Elena looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" Eliza nodded. "Henry didn't just own the land, he made it fruitful for others. That's what I have to do too." 3 days later, a cattle merchant from Dallas bought the lands for a sum that would keep the school running for years. Eliza signed the documents with a steady hand, thinking of Henry, who had taught her to write in those very chairs. "One thing, miss," the merchant said. "My wife heard about your school. Could she send her sister here? She's a widow with 3 children." "Of course." Leaving the bank, Elena shook her head admiringly. You never cease to amaze me. Why? You just sold half your inheritance to help strangers. Eliza looked towards the house, where smoke from the chimney rose into the clear sky. They're not strangers, they're family. The spring wind carried the scent of wildflowers and new beginnings. The summer of 1888 brought unexpected changes. Eliza's school had become famous throughout the territory, and delegations arrived from distant cities to study her educational method. But it was a letter from Santa Fe that changed everything. It's from the governor, Elena said, handing her the sealed envelope. Eliza opened it with trembling hands, the white handkerchief in her pocket seeming to give her courage. Dear Miss Hayes, she read aloud. The New Mexico Territory wishes to establish schools similar to yours in all counties. We offer you project supervision and a compensation of $1,000 annually. The children in the room erupted in shouts of joy, but Eliza remained silent. It's an incredible opportunity, said Eleanor, who had meanwhile become the school's main assistant. It means leaving this house, Eliza murmured. Leaving Henry's land. That evening, while the children slept, Eliza sat in Henry's armchair. Elena and Eleanor joined her, bringing hot tea. What's bothering you? Elena asked. I'm afraid that by accepting the position I would betray Henry's memory. This house, this land, they are all that's left of him. Eleanor took her hand. Eliza, Henry lives in what you do, not where you do it. Every child you teach to read is a piece of his heart that continues to beat. And if I fail, if I can't create other schools like this, then you will have at least tried, Elena said. That's what counts. The following night, Eliza had a dream. Henry was sitting on the porch, younger and smiling. The wind ruffled his brown hair. Papa, she said in the dream, I don't know what to do. You always know what to do, my child. Listen to your heart. But if I leave this house, how will you find me? Henry laughed, the sound warm like the summer sun. I am wherever you are. In your kindness, in your strength, in the love you give to others. A house is just wood and stone. You are my true legacy. Eliza woke up with tears in her eyes, but for the first time they were tears of peace. The next day she gathered everyone in the main hall. The children, Eleanor, Elena, even Silas, who had arrived the night before. I've decided, she said, clutching the handkerchief. I will accept the governor's offer. A silence filled with emotion filled the room. But this house will remain open, she continued. Eleanor will run the school here. Elena will help me with the new project, and I will return every 3 months to check that everything is going well. Johnny, now skilled at reading and writing, raised his hand. Miss Eliza, does this mean we won't see you anymore? It means I will help other children like you. But this will always be my home, and you will always be my family. Silas approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. Henry would be proud of you. I know, Eliza said, looking at the empty armchair. Because now I truly feel him here with us. The summer wind entered through the open windows, bringing the scent of jasmine and future. The last day in Whisper Creek came too soon. Eliza had packed her few personal belongings, some of Henry's books, the old family Bible, and of course the white handkerchief, now washed and carefully folded. The children had prepared a surprise for her, a collective drawing of the house with all of them on the porch, and in the center, larger than the others, the figure of Eliza with open arms as if embracing the world. Why did you draw me so big? She asked, moved. Because for us you are big, Johnny said simply. Eleanor's eyes were glistening. Promise you'll be back for Christmas? I promise, Eliza said, embracing her. And you promise to take care of our family, as if it were my own. Elena loaded the last suitcase onto the carriage that would take them to Santa Fe. Ready for adventure? Eliza took one last look at the house, the porch where she had spent endless evenings with Henry, the oak tree under which she had buried the life-saving documents. Every corner told a story. Every stone guarded a memory. Henry, she whispered to the wind, come with me. In response, a gentle gust ruffled her hair, bringing the familiar scent of sage and earth. Eliza smiled and climbed into the carriage. The journey lasted 2 days. Elena slept against her shoulder, but Eliza stayed awake watching the changing landscape. Rocky hills, red canyons, endless skies that spoke of new beginnings. Santa Fe welcomed her with dusty streets and adobe houses that glowed in the setting sun. Governor Thompson showed her around the palace, showing her the office that would be hers. A spacious room with large windows and empty shelves waiting to be filled with projects and hopes. "How many schools do you think you can open?" the governor asked. "As many as are needed," Eliza replied without hesitation. The first week was a whirlwind of meetings, documents, trips to villages to assess needs. Eliza met mayors, preachers, desperate mothers who didn't know how to feed their children, widows who couldn't read legal documents. "It's bigger than I imagined," she told Elena one evening, as they planned the second school in Las Cruces. "Are you afraid?" Eliza touched the handkerchief in her pocket, feeling Henry's invisible presence. "No." Excited. The letter from Whisper Creek arrived on Friday. Eleanor wrote that 3 new families had asked for help, that Johnny was teaching the younger children to read, that Henry's oak tree had new green leaves. "And Silas?" Elena asked, reading over her shoulder. "He stops by every week, checks that everything is fine, and always sits in Henry's armchair smoking his pipe. The children adore him." Eliza laughed, imagining the former sheriff reading stories to the little ones. That night on the pension's balcony, she looked at the New Mexico stars. They were different from those at home, but the North Star always shone in the same position. "Wherever you go," she murmured, remembering Henry's words, "it will always lead you home." The mountain wind brought her the scent of pines and future. A year later, at Christmas of 1889, Eliza returned to Whisper Creek with a heart full of stories to tell. The carriage taking her home passed through familiar landscapes covered in light snow, and when she saw the silhouette of the old oak tree against the winter sky, she felt tears well up in her eyes. The house was lit by 100 candles. On the porch, Eleanor waited with all the children wrapped in colorful shawls. Johnny had grown, almost a man now, and held the hand of a new girl Eliza had never seen. "Miss Eliza!" they cried in chorus, running to the carriage. The hugs multiplied, warm as blankets on a winter night. Elena descended laughing, her arms laden with gifts brought from Santa Fe. "How's our little teacher doing?" Silas asked, emerging from the house with his pipe in hand and a smile that wrinkled his entire face. "Not so little anymore," Eliza replied. "We've opened 12 schools in 8 months. And how many children?" 200 so far, but more arrive every week." Eleanor hugged her tightly. "You've become famous, you know. Newspapers write about you, they call you the angel of the territory." Eliza laughed, touching the handkerchief in her pocket. Henry always laughed at people's labels. That evening, sitting around the fireplace, the children asked for stories about the new schools. Eliza told of Isabella, a young girl who had learned English in 2 months, of Thomas, an orphan who now taught math to younger classmates, of women who had learned to read letters from soldier husbands. "But the most beautiful story," she said, watching the flames dance, "is that of a school in an Apache village. At first, no one wanted to come. They were afraid of the white man. Then a little girl arrived alone and asked to learn to write her grandmother's name. The next day, 2 little girls came, then 4. Now we have 30 students and an old Apache who teaches us their language." Johnny listened with open mouth. "And do you also learn their language?" "Of course. How can you teach if you don't learn?" The winter wind whistled gently around the house, but inside there was only warmth and love. "There's something I need to tell you," Eleanor said after the children had gone to bed. "Last month, a man came from Washington, D.C. from the federal government." Eliza stiffened. "What did he want?" "To offer you a position at the Department of Education. He said the president heard about your work." Elna whistled in admiration. "Washington? Eliza, that's incredible." But Eliza shook her head. "No, my place is here in the territory, with the people who truly need it." Silas smiled, blowing smoke from his pipe. Henry would agree. That night, Eliza slept in her old room. Upon waking, she found a thin layer of frost on the window, drawing crystals like stars. She got up and looked towards Henry's oak tree, and for an instant she thought she saw a familiar figure leaning against the trunk. She went down to the garden, her bare feet on the frozen ground. There was no one there, of course, but at the base of the tree she found something that made her heart tremble. A sprig of jasmine, impossible in midwinter, Yet there, fresh and fragrant. Eliza smiled, clutching the small miracle. "Good morning, Papa." The wind ruffled her hair in an invisible caress. Spring of 1890. Eliza returned to Santa Fe with a full heart and new projects. The jasmine sprig was dry now, pressed between the pages of Henry's Bible, but its miraculous scent lingered in her memory. The 20th school opened in a mining village in the mountains. 100 dirty, hungry children who had never seen a book, women who sewed by candlelight because they couldn't read signs. In 6 months, the village transformed. Children teaching their parents the alphabet, mothers reading medical recipes, men writing letters to distant families. "The governor wants to see you," Elena said, entering the office with a telegram. "Good news or bad? Depends on how you see it. They're appointing you supervisor of education for the entire American West." Eliza rose from her desk, the white handkerchief peeking from her pocket like a small flag of peace. At the window, the spring wind made the curtains dance. "It means leaving home again," she said thoughtfully. "It means helping thousands of children instead of hundreds." That evening, sitting on the pension's balcony, Eliza wrote a letter to Eleanor. "Dear sister of my heart, the government is offering to take our schools to California, Oregon, even Alaska. Is this what Henry would have wanted? To spread the love of learning like seeds in the wind?" The answer arrived a week later. "Dear Eliza, yesterday Johnny asked me what Henry would think of you. I told him, he thinks his daughter has become what he dreamed of, a woman who doesn't fear distances when there's good to be done. Go where your heart leads you. We will always be here waiting for you." On her last day in Santa Fe, Eliza visited the first school they had opened together. Isabella, the Mexican girl, now 15, was teaching the newcomers. When she saw Eliza, she ran to hug her. "Miss, is it true you're going to California?" "It's true." "Take this," Isabella said, taking off a colorful beaded necklace. "It's a symbol of my family. So wherever you go, you'll carry a piece of all of us." Eliza put it on, touched. Around her neck, along with the necklace, she felt the invisible weight of all the lives she had touched. The train to San Francisco departed at dawn. Elena and she boarded with 4 suitcases and hundreds of memories. As Santa Fe disappeared on the horizon, Eliza pulled out the white handkerchief and spread it on the window pane. "What are you doing?" Elena asked. "Saying goodbye and promising to return." The wind of the journey brought new scents: sea salt, giant pines, unexplored lands. Before them lay the America of the future, with children waiting to learn to dream. "Do you ever think it all started with an injustice?" Elena asked. Eliza smiled, thinking of Henry, of Silas, of the children of Whisper Creek, of the women she had helped read their first words. "No," she said. "It started with an act of love. The rest just came after." The train whistled as it entered a dark tunnel, but on the other side there was light, always light. 3 years later, when newspapers wrote of the education revolution in the West and the incredible network of schools stretching from Texas to Alaska, Eliza returned to Whisper Creek for the last time. She was ill, but serene. She died in the bed where Henry had watched over her as a child, surrounded by all her children of the heart. Johnny, now a teacher, Elena, who had become her deputy, Eleanor, who had transformed the house into a boarding school, Silas holding her hand as her breath grew faint. "The handkerchief," she whispered with her last breath. They placed it in the coffin with her, that small white square that had endured pain and joy, fear and hope, becoming a symbol of a life dedicated to others. The spring wind fluttered the flowers on the grave, and someone swore they heard Henry's laughter mingle with the whisper of the leaves. If this story has moved you and you want to hear more stories of courage and hope, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are listening from. Your inspiring stories can become the next narrative we share together.